Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. We'll get started since it's 4:30 now. And welcome to Student Senate's live stream Q&A all about COVID-19 and its impacts on the student body. My name is Julia Pardee, and I'm the president of Student Senate, and I'll be moderating the panel today. And we'll be addressing student-submitted questions related to COVID-19's impact on the Lehigh student experience. And we have a bunch of questions already submitted from our email and social media, so it was really great to see questions from a wide array of issues facing students, and we encourage all attendees to continue to submit questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom. We will only be asking questions related to the overall topic of this live stream, whether that be academics, health and safety, finance, scheduling, or anything else that was impacted as Lehigh transitioned to online classes and an online community. And this will also be recorded and posted on the Lehigh University YouTube later today. So I'll have all of the panelists introduce themselves and their roles, and then we can get started. Unfortunately, President Simon could not make it at this time. He may be able to tune in later, but these panelists are really fantastic, and I think we'll all be able to address your issues.
So you want me to start?
Sure.
All right, so hi everybody, I'm Pat Farrell. I am Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs.
I'm Pat Johnson, VP Finance and Administration. And I don't know if my camera's on.
It is, I
Your
see
camera's
you.
on.
Oh, good. All right, I feel better now, so hi everybody.
And I'm Jennifer Jensen, Deputy Provost for Academic Affairs and Professor of Political Science.
Great. So our first question is, what should students do if they get the coronavirus in regards to exams and classes?
Maybe I'll start with that one. So for a student who's not on campus is a somewhat different issue. We do still have a few students on campus who could not leave for a variety of reasons. But for a student who gets a virus and as a result that hampers their ability to either do their coursework or prepare for finals, for example, that's a conversation they have with your faculty member, much as any other challenge you might have around getting ready for finals. We'll expect faculty to be reasonably flexible in how do they deal with that. They'll want to see you finish the course just as you will. So I would invite you to work with your faculty members on ways in which you can complete the work, perhaps over an extended period of time or with some other flexibility involved. But I'm expecting most students will want to finish the work, get a grade, or do the credit, no credit, but get credit for the course. And most faculty will want to see that happen too. So my expectation is that what you need to do is contact your faculty member, work with them. They'll be as flexible as they can be. Together, hopefully you'll get the course done, get an appropriate evaluation of your learning, and get the credits you've earned.
Great. So the next question is regards to work study. My current work study is no longer available now that campus is closed. Are there any new remote work studies opportunities available? I feel as though a lot of students, including myself, counted on the income they would be receiving through work study programs.
This is Pat Johnson. There was a note sent out. All work study is still going on. You're still being paid by work study, and that is actually determined by the federal government that's going to take place. So I'm not sure if somebody feels that don't have work study, maybe they should contact the financial aid office because they definitely do have it.
Great. Has the university considered implementing any sort of mid-online semester review system to allow students to give feedback to their professors while still giving them time for actually making the changes to the way they're teaching?
We certainly had that conversation with faculty. As you might know, there are a number of faculty who would do that routinely, even under ordinary circumstances, get a variety of kinds of feedback from their students. We encourage faculty to do that, particularly in this situation where for a lot of students and a lot of faculty, this kind of all-in online learning is new. Most students and many faculty have done maybe a course online or a little bit of their program online. That's a little different from doing your entire set of courses online, at least for half of a semester. So I'll continue to encourage faculty. I'd like to leave that optional for faculty because then they can be creative about what they want to ask, how do they ask it, when's a good time, what kind of information is really helpful. But I will remind faculty again that this would be a great opportunity to get that kind of feedback from your students. And of course, we count on students to give constructive feedback. If you're just grumpy about some feature that you're no longer on campus, I understand that. There's not much we can do about that. So well-crafted questions and really helpful answers would be really constructive. And I'll continue to encourage faculty to do that.
Great. On a similar academic note, how will finals be administered?
Well, my expectation is, well, the final times will be the same as they normally are. That is, there'll be those couple days for study, and then we'll have normal final times and dates. And I would expect those final times and dates, even though you're not meeting collectively in the classroom, would be the time for your final in any particular course. Now, administrating finals over online is a little bit more challenging, as you probably know. It may be challenging for students to take such a final, particularly if it turns out to be a timed final, that you have 3 hours to do it. It can be challenging for faculty to write an appropriate exam. And frankly, it's still a little bit uncertain. Everyone is worried a little bit about the exam integrity. We know students know that they're expected to maintain the same level of integrity on exams as they might if they were sitting in a classroom taking a final. That's a little bit of a worry for faculty. But I expect the timing to be the same, and I expect the windows for exams to be the same. If faculty choose to use that 3-hour chunk for a timed exam, they can. I think CoreSite offers the timed exam option. If faculty choose to, as we normally would permit, a different, like a take-home exam, they can do that. So I would expect finals, I mean, online makes them look quite different. On the other hand, the timing-wise, to look quite similar to what we've seen in the past.
So this was a live submitted question. A couple of my professors have instructed that they are going to make their exams harder to compensate the possibility of students cheating. Was that instructed by the administration? It feels as if some professors are making a hard situation even harder.
No, there's no instruction. The only instruction I said is I told faculty they would not be allowed to hire third-party or force students to hire third-party proctors. There's a number of issues with that aside from the cost, a bit of invasion of privacy. Those are typically some kind of camera surveillance of you while you take your exam. That feels a little creepy to me. So in that sense, you could blame me that I've handicapped faculty a little bit in some of the tools they would like to use to be able to be confident that students are doing their own work, using only appropriate materials, and so on. I'm not convinced that that's the only way, those kind of online proctoring systems are the only way to actually address issues around student integrity. So, but that does remain a challenge. I'm not sure that making the exam harder is actually a particularly good solution either. It's difficult to come up with ironclad solutions that will assure students of a fair exam, will assure faculty that the work that they're seeing from a student is that student's work and only that student's work. No sharing, no online work if that's disallowed or not allowed in a particular course. So I think it is a challenge, and it's exacerbated a little bit by our collective limited experience in delivering online exams that require or expect students to honestly participate. I think the best solution here will be a genuine effort by faculty to write really good exams that accurately assess student learning, and frankly, a sincere and disciplinary approach by students to not take advantage of some of the resources they might be able to get away with, but recognizing that we and they are counting on what they've promised relative to their integrity around exams. We're counting on that, their fellow students are counting on that, that our students will also live up to that expectation. I'm hopeful that they will, and I'm happy to encourage faculty to expect that of their students, and that's what I hope the outcome will be.
Great. So this is shifting gears a little bit to a finance question. Is there any way that students can see how their refund was calculated?
It is posted, this is Pat Johnson again, it's posted on their bills. And I'll be quite honest, I was looking at another one of the questions today. I was looking at someone's bill, and I think if there's any question at all about how it's calculated, they should call financial aid. Financial aid is expecting people to call, but it is definitely posted on the bill. So any credits you get and any charges you get are all on the bill, on your student bill.
And there was a follow-up question in response to the previous one about exams. Provost Farrell, did you say that the faculty cannot watch us take our exams? One of my professors is making us take midterm 2 while watching us through Zoom.
I did not specifically say that. I don't consider that really, I mean, in the sense if students are on Zoom for a normal class, I'm not sure I consider that particularly invasive in the sense that you're normally there at the class. So I don't consider that hugely problematic. What I was more worried about is third parties, which I understand the way they work is they basically take over the camera on your computer and more or less record what you do while you take the exam. The problem is I have no idea what they do with that information. Maybe nothing, it might be quite benign or not. So I find less problematic the notion of faculty saying, while you're taking your exam, I want you to be logged on to Zoom and sort of visible so I can sort of see you are sitting there doing it like you would in classroom, where I don't think that's particularly unfair for faculty to expect students to physically be in the classroom. I get to see who you are. I know you're there and paying attention and taking your exam. So I don't consider that to be particularly invasive. That's quite different from hiring outside parties to more or less record you from your camera, and we have no control and no particular knowledge what happens to that information. So to me, I think the notion of having a faculty member want you on camera while you're doing your exam on Zoom is perhaps a little bit invasive, but it doesn't feel to me like it's much different from you sitting in the classroom taking your exam.
Another follow-up question to that, what do you think about making these exams harder as a policy? You said it is not ideal, however, professors are still doing it. Is it allowed?
Well, certainly professors are, I expect faculty to write an exam that will appropriately assess student learning. As you know, although across the courses you've taken, some faculty, across faculty, some have different views of how difficult an exam should be in order to assess student learning. I don't expect students or faculty to write exams that are intended to be punitive, like to punish you. But I also don't expect them to write exams that guarantee everyone gets an A. They're supposed to assess student learning. So my push for faculty would be to say, think hard about the exam you write, and is it an accurate assessment of what you want your students to learn, whether it's difficult or not. And if that's what it is, then I'm okay with it. If you have other reasons for asking difficult questions that aren't focused on assessment of student learning, that's a little problematic. And from a distance, that is, I can't judge very easily which of those two is the case. I'll be happy to remind faculty that that is what exams are for, is assessing student learning. And final exams, in my view, are even more for that, to assess what you've learned across the semester. Sometimes students think that makes them more difficult because they might be very comprehensive. I'm less worried about making exams easy or difficult, and more worried about, are they really, do faculty feel like they're an accurate way to evaluate what students have really learned? And if they are, then then I will leave it to faculty to figure out what to ask and how to ask it. So I think that's the best I can say. I'm happy to remind faculty that that is what exams are for, and I'll leave it to them to figure out how challenging or not an exam should be. But the goal of an exam is neither to be easy or hard. It's to assess learning. And hopefully those who have learned a lot get a chance to shine, and those who maybe have learned less, well, that will become evident.
How is the university approaching the scheduling of the commencement ceremony, and what sorts of options are the administration considering for graduation, postponement, digital ceremony, etc.?
Well, I think at this point, we haven't made firm decisions, but I would say what our tendency at the moment is to expect that we will not be able to have a commencement ceremony as we normally do at the time that we had originally planned. We're looking at the possibility of having such a ceremony, but having it in late August, or sometime in the fall. I'm thinking late August, but it could be Founders Day, it could be another day. That is to give the seniors, if they can come back, a chance to have their celebration live with as many as can come with family and friends as possible. I don't think we'll be able to do that in mid-May. So at this point, we haven't settled on precisely what it might look like or precisely when. But I think our thinking right now is to have a ceremony, but do it later in early in the fall, when hopefully people are free to travel and feel safe being in large groups, and the kind of celebration that particularly seniors and their families want to have is a possibility. So that's what we're looking at now. I'd expect in the next couple of weeks there'll be a more formal final decision and announcement of precisely how that's going to work.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the administration's been really open to hearing input from students on this. There's a small group of seniors who are senators that are working with senior leadership to develop other ideas and alternatives. So if you have any suggestions, please send them to our Instagram account at Lehigh Senate, or email us at insend@lehigh.edu. Many students who are still on and off campus are now able to print any documents or borrow books for classwork since libraries are closed. Currently, the University Center is open from 9:30 to 7 p.m. anyways for meals for students. As a result, is it possible to open up the M room to allow students to print documents for classes, and or to open Linderman Library for an hour each day?
I was expecting to have Rick Hall here, but he's not here to answer, so I apologize on that. I thought it was a good idea. I think opening up Linderman is going to be really, really difficult. I think if the other building is open, it's something we can look into. If the UC is open.
Yes.
For grab and go meals, yes.
Yes, for
grab and go meals.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible?
I thought there were printers in the hallway there. Are they not there anymore? Or maybe I misremember.
I don't think there's printers in the halls of the UC. I think it's just in the M room.
Yeah, it struck me as the sort of thing that we should be able to look into.
Sure.
We haven't figured this out for sure, but I can understand why students would want to print some things. I will say, I think there's a limit though, because we don't have our regular facilities open. So my hope would be that we would not have one or two students monopolizing a printer to print everything out that we are all working online now. I would hope some good-spiritedness would prevail if we were able to do something like this.
I'll add too, just because we've been talking to the Wellness Center so much, that we would be worried about social distancing. If everybody went at the same time, that would be a problem. I can tell you from our Wellness Center, that would be a problem. So we might have to institute some type of sign up because I don't think it's a problem to open the room. It's just going to be, how do we give the access that you would need to get the materials printed off?
The next question is in regards to the credit, no credit policy. There's been some confusion related to this, and could you elaborate how the different levels of grading options and the routes a student can take?
Jennifer, you want to do that one?
Sure. First of all, I want to say a shout out to everyone who worked on this policy, which includes a number of student senate reps on the Educational Policy Committee. We did this in 3 days, which, if you know anything about how policy works at the university, it should have taken about 1.5 years. So thanks to all involved. I think the thing that really guided us was making sure that this was fair and flexible for students. If people have specific questions, there is a very thorough Q&A on the Registration and Academic Services website, which is ras.lehigh.edu. It's what you used to call the registrar's office. Essentially, this does not affect your GPA, and we realize that means that certain things can't be calculated. You can get a credit for a grade that is anything from an A to a C minus. If you get a D, that gets a DCR rather than CR, because we need something that would distinguish. Essentially, Ds don't count to move you to the next level in a course sequence. You can't go from Calc 1 to Calc 2. So CR, DCR, and then NCR, or no credit. None of those affect your GPA, however.
Great, thank you. So what is the protocol if a student living on campus contracts the virus but is nowhere to go aside from campus? What kind of preparations or thought have you put toward the fact that COVID-19 may continue through the fall semester?
Those are two different questions.
Yeah.
Let's start with the first one. Pat, you want to talk about the first one?
Sure. We have already given thought to that, and we have identified areas where they would need to have like a private bathroom, private spaces. So depending on where they are now, they may be able to stay where they are, or we may need to move them to some place where they would have no shared type housing or bathroom. So we've identified those areas already. We're ready for that. We're thinking that probably will happen somewhere, somehow. So we have already anticipated putting rooms available for that, having rooms available to do that.
As to a more extended, COVID-19, of course, we certainly hope that that's far from the case. At this point, I think I would say we're trying to expand a repertoire of options to at least be able to think about. I mean, a natural default would be to say we could do a semester online as we did half of this semester. I think for a lot of students and faculty, that's possible but disappointing. That leaves a lot of things that we'd like to see in part of the student experience difficult to do. So I think we also want to give ourselves a chance to think about other creative opportunities. For example, if one had a hunch that it's not the entire semester, but half the semester, would we want to break the semester into two chunks and have a first chunk that is a certain set of courses for half your credits for the semester and another set that might be live on campus? Would we want to think of other ways we could, rather than just the default to continue to do what we've started to do this semester, are there other ways we could better integrate what we'd like to see for Lehigh experience, even if it has to be not always on campus? And will take a little bit of thinking. So I think it's too early to really try to say exactly what would happen should we have to continue into the fall. In fact, we're still sort of wrestling about what are we going to do about summer? Is it what's our decision regarding even the first session for summer session? We have to make a decision on that relatively soon. So I would say I can't give you a good answer about specifically what we do in the fall. We are trying to think about what's the range of possibilities in addition to what we've now put in place for this semester, to not use that as the only possibility or the default possibility.
Another live submitted question. I've heard that for students living on campus that we will all be required to move to Farrington Square. When are we expected to move out if this is true?
They actually have identified, I was just on a meeting today about that. They've identified two areas. Farrington is one, and let me just look at my notes. Broadhead is the other. That's we want to be able to spread students out because of the social distancing requirements, but we also need to consolidate spaces for safety purposes. So those are the two buildings that we were talking about today. If we do that, it'll be sometime next week that'll take place. Just being conscious again of making sure that everybody is safe and secure. When there's some people, I understand there's one building that has like one person in it, which has got to be a little scary, I would think. Mm-hmm. So we're thinking about it from that perspective as well.
We have another question about how the housing dining refund was calculated and what fraction of housing is being refunded.
Housing, both of them, they were prorated from March 16th. So both of those, I think housing was 60 days and dining was 59 days. It's pretty easy once they identified what plan. They had to go through each individual person and identify what type of plan, this is dining part, which plan they were on, and giving them credit for the amount that they did not use. Because if you had swiped, for example, there are people who had used their whole dining credits for the year, so that was all taken into account. On the housing side, it's based on where they were again. unless there was some need, and then they got some credits related to those people who had need-based aid. All of those calculations are based on level 1 and on the full board plan. So it depends, each individual person had a different answer about how that was calculated. But again, it's all on the bill. And believe me, it's really not that easy to understand. Seriously, I was looking at the bills, but there are people available to help you walk through that if you need to.
And so if someone wanted to know more about this, should they contact the financial aid office?
Yes, they should, because we knew there'd be questions. And so we do have, like I said, at least 2 people there that can answer all these questions.
Great.
Let me just clarify, 2 people who are available online.
Well, it's all by telephone.
Yeah, when you say there, I just don't want anyone on campus to go wandering over to financial aid, because they're not sitting in the office waiting. They are available.
I can't even get into the building either. So no, this is all, Jennifer's right to remind everybody, this is all online. It's all call in.
And I think one of the things,
the phone.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is helpful for students to remember is that some of your bill was not paid for by you, it was paid for by grants and federal funds. And we can't give you back federal funds if you didn't use the housing or the food. And that's made, I think, the bill's a little more difficult to understand. So if people think, wait a minute, where did it all go? That's playing a role too. And I've heard the Assistant Vice Provost for Financial Aid and Financial Services talk about this. I don't have everyone's bill in hand, but that's a lot of what's behind, I think, some of the confusion about, gee, I expected to get this and I got this, and they can talk through things individually with students.
So the next question is specifically relating to the credit, no credit option. My major requires me to get a C- in any course that is for my major, regardless if it is a prerequisite or not. If I were to opt for the credit, no credit option, and I get a D in a class that is required for my major, but is not a prerequisite, and I would opt to have a DCR on my transcript, would that be something that I could still use to move on with my coursework, or would that decision fall within my department?
Okay, there's a lot of moving pieces there, so I'm not entirely sure. I mean, that's one of those go see your advisor ones. Yeah. What I will say is that let me give you the overarching reason that we created the D and or a DCR, the basically credit, but you got a D, and that was to allow departments to say, I mean, we've had a long-standing policy, and one of the things that, for example, mathematics was very worried, accounting was very worried about, well, what are the students who, if they get a D in accounting 151 and math 21 and they're not ready to move on to the next semester sequence, we wanted departments to have a means to not allow those students to move forward. At the same time, we wanted to give the students who are getting Ds the same flexibility that we were giving the students to get Cs, to not have that affect GPA in what has been a just really difficult semester, I think, for both students and for faculty to make some quick adjustments. So I would say see the advising office, look at the RAS information page, but you may have a very particular case. Departments have flexibility if they want it. What departments cannot do is say, oh, no, you didn't take that for a grade, therefore we're not letting it count toward the major. The educational policy made a decision, and the university affirmed that if students take something that's credit, no credit, and it would have counted toward the major as a grade, meaning they got that generally that A through C- range, that it's still gonna count toward the major, even if you took it just for credit. Does that help?
I think the advice of talk to your advisor just for this specific case is a good one. But I would say normally, if a D would not allow a course to count towards the major, if that's what you're saying, the DCR very likely would not either. But again, that's something, talk to your advisor, confirm with the department.
What is the current timeline regarding second-year housing selection?
That's a good question. We have talked about that. What is slowing that down is that, as you know, the state of Pennsylvania has stopped all construction, and we were working on that new residence hall, and we will know more in a couple of weeks, because if we can't get back to construction in time to get it ready for the fall, that will change what the housing options are. So we're trying to figure that out. So we probably won't know for a couple of weeks. At that point, we have to make a decision because I think we won't be able to finish the new residence hall at that point. So it'll be out soon. It's just an unknown at this point.
Another question about housing. Are freshmen that were accepted into Greek life but not yet initiated going to be allowed to live in their chapter house next semester?
I think that was the outcome of the agreement amongst all the Greek chapters after the pause, that they came to a solution, and except for the COVID virus, I think that would have been the case, correct? So my expectation is that, again, assuming everything is back as, we're back full strength in the fall, that yes, they would be allowed to be in the chapter house as they had planned to be. Obviously, that'll be confirmed with the whole housing business that Pat Johnson just mentioned. But I don't know why that particular feature would be different from what folks would have expected absent the COVID virus challenges.
Yeah, and Recall just submitted yes to that question.
Oh, okay, good. Well, that's
great. Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Authoritative yes than mine.
Yes.
That's good to hear him confirm.
Would you reconsider refunding tuition for the value lost in online classes and the limitations this places on student learning, especially for tuition expenses students can no longer use, such as library services, health services, university events and performing arts, student engagement opportunities, physical facilities, technology, etc.?
Well, I should probably answer that one, and maybe Pat can chime in. First of all, I would say the primary outcome, let's say, of your learning, and of course that's what your tuition pays for, is what you learn, and the evidence of that is credits, graduation, progress towards your Lehigh degree. So our goal has been all along that all of those things happen in different ways and in different venue from how they might happen here on campus. But all those things still happen. You still hopefully are learning, I would hope, as much or maybe even more as you would have been under normal circumstances. You certainly are hopefully earning credits you would otherwise have earned. Those who are going to graduate will graduate as they otherwise would have. So while many of the practical details are obviously quite different, a lot of what I would say the outcomes for students, not social outcomes, but the academic outcomes, actually aren't nearly as different as you might imagine. As you can list off, as you did, a whole variety of features that some students might use, some students might not, that would be available if you're on campus. That if you're not on campus are not available to you, true enough. There's also another list, which you didn't list, of new features that are now available to students that we've invested in to try to make the online programs work that we otherwise might not have. So in one sense, it is true that on-campus activities are reduced. Online activities have been fairly dramatically expanded for both faculty and students. I don't know exactly how that comes out financially, but I think given our overall goal of helping students to learn what we had hoped they would learn and move on in their Lehigh programs, I think what we've done so far is entirely appropriate.
Why did Lehigh University choose to not offer a buffer time in addition to spring break so that students could have properly prepared for their online studies? This resulted in myself and many other students scrambling to move out and prepare for the extreme change in our lives given the very short notice.
So this was largely at my urging because it was my expectation would be that under any circumstances, there would be a scramble to figure out on the students' part of where am I going to be, how am I going to get set up to do this, a scramble on faculty part to figure out suddenly I'm moving to teaching my course online. I hadn't planned that. My view was the best way to get moving on that is to get moving on that. Postponing it for a week, my expectation would have made everyone relax, not do very much, and the first week back, whenever that first week would have still been a scramble. So my view was, even though that makes it challenging and perhaps a little stressful for all concerned, is let's get started. It is certainly true. Some students weren't there for the first day of class. Some faculty weren't as prepared as they might have liked to have been. But I wanted us to get started as quickly as we could, get our feet wet, begin to learn how does this work from a student perspective? How does this work from a faculty perspective? What do we need to fix? What needs to improve? How do we change from day 1 to day 2 through day 5? And it seemed to me that a better way to do that would be to begin the experiment as soon as we could, rather than waiting and beginning the experiment and still having to go through all those steps of, in the sense, getting ourselves off the ground and learning how to do it.
Since Southside Commons has been referred to as Lehigh's affiliated housing complex and is considered a partnership between Lehigh University and Greystar, can the Lehigh administration push Greystar to provide students with some sort of credit? It should be noted that the entire Southside Commons building is rented by Lehigh students, many of whom left on-campus housing after the release of the October 2018 memo stating no on-campus housing will be available to upperclassmen due to the demolition of Tremblay.
We are working with Southside Commons. The building is actually owned by a company called Greystar, and Greystar has their only business is student residence, and they have residents across the world. And we've talked to them several times. They feel that their policies are consistent with all of their residence halls. We're certainly in touch with them. We meet with them on a weekly basis. I can't say that something will change, but we will certainly continue our contact with them and see what they're doing with their policies, because this issue has affected all of their properties across, like I said, across the world. So it'll be an interesting discussion. We'll continue having discussions with them. I can't make any promises, but we will continue having discussions with them.
Another finance related question. Why would some students lose academic scholarships if classes are continuing, decreasing their room and board refund? Why is the prorated calculations for board dining fee dependent on scholarships for tuition?
Jennifer, did you want to answer that, or you want me to take that? I could do it.
I don't know that I'm going to have a complete answer. I mean, I think I was thinking about in terms of federal financial aid. We can't give you the federal financial aid if we haven't done the full service, but I mean, maybe you want to provide a fuller answer.
Well, I can answer it this way. Academic scholarships were not adjusted at all. I think and actually the information I got was that they're earmarked to cover tuition only, such as trustees, founders, and some athletic scholarships, and they're valued as a percentage of tuition only. And they were not updated. The only ones that were updated were need-based awards. And that is based, it gets back to Jennifer's answer before, is really based on where the source of the funding came from. If it was someone who had need-based, those things were adjusted based on the rules related to that need base, because the cost of attendance was now less because they were not here on campus for dining and housing. So it's not academic scholarships. Those are certainly covered by tuition. So that's not the issue. I think it's more the financial aid that's used to cover dining and rooms.
Let me see if I can try to explain this and it makes sense. So if students are living, and this is particularly for students who are living off, we have to account for your eating something when we think about what is your cost of education for the rest of the semester. You don't just not eat. And so when we're putting money back in, it doesn't all go there. That was how it was explained to me a little bit. That it's a prorated amount. I'm not sure I'm doing this very well. This may be something that's more for financial aid.
I was thinking it really is fairly complicated, and they're really good at explaining it. But it is, but it does not. The refund does not cover tuition on the academic programs are still there. All that money just was not affected at all.
Will students be able to have items shipped to them from the mail center, considering that urgent mail will likely be there until August?
We've actually been talking to some companies that will do that for us. So the answer is yes. I think we're still working out the logistics of that because we have to get knowledge of, you know, what's there, who's expecting what, and what to do with that, some direction on what to do with that, where it should be shipped. But we have talked to some companies that actually will pack up and ship things in rooms. That's their business. So if we'll follow up on that some more and get some more information out to people as we learn more about who could use that service.
This is another credit, no credit question. If a student were to take every class, CR, DCR, or NC, would they have a GPA of 0? Is this possible?
I would think it would be infinite.
I know.
Yes, they would not have a GPA. And there are some implications of this, and honestly, we're still trying to sort this out, and this is something we had talked about with the students in the Educational Policy Committee. We're still trying to figure out what to do with Dean's List, for example, because many students may not be having their full semester, and we don't want to put pressure on students to have grades. You know, we don't know exactly how. We can't guarantee that all the expectations will follow. That said, you're not having a GPA of 0, and that certainly is not going to calculate into your cumulative GPA, so you don't have to worry about that. In essence, you just don't have a GPA. We're not the only school that's doing this, by the way. The University of Michigan did this, and they actually made the default credit, no credit. You have to ask for grades. That's just one example. And an awful lot of schools are going, you know, pass, fail, credit, no credit. And they're working them out all in slightly different ways, what the different applications will mean.
What is the policy in regards to replacing a pass grade with the new grade from retaking a course if you choose CR the second time taking a course?
I believe it does not replace the first grade, but you should look on the RAS website. As I recall, the last grades, I want to go back to the website because I don't remember all the iterations myself.
I also sent that link in the chat about 20 minutes ago if people wanted to check that out now.
Oh, good.
According to prior information, next year's class of 2024 will have accepted more students than previous classes. In the case that the new residence halls are not finished, how does the university plan to accommodate on-campus housing?
One of the things, I know that's why I say we haven't sent out the housing announcements yet. The building that I wanted to take away, Tremblay, will still stay up. And that's one of the ways where we'll be accommodating some of those students. We really do want to have the new residence hall done. It's going to be really nice, but that is one of the ways that we will accommodate students if we have to do that. It's not that Tremblay's not as big as the new residence hall would have been. So we're also going to use some of the houses that are available to us. We've already, believe me, and we've already modeled out many different ways to accommodate the class depending on the size.
How are professors expecting students to take closed book, closed notes exams on Zoom? It just increases the stress, and now I'm stressed that others are plotting to cheat with notes while I take my tests honestly.
Well, I might challenge the statement a little bit. How does it increase the stress any more than if you were doing this live in class where you're doing no notes, other than you might suspect your colleagues are not following those expectations? So I guess I would like to, there's no simple solution here since we don't really have the exam police who will go visit you at your house and make sure that you will follow all the rules. I think we'll look for faculty to put together exams that they feel are appropriate. We'll look for students to understand what the expectations around exam integrity are and to follow those expectations. I totally understand that there are some among us who will do what they can until they get caught. That's not a very good practice to engage in. Certainly not something I'd like to see students leave Lehigh having learned and perfected. So to me, this is an opportunity to challenge faculty, to challenge students to say, with somewhat less supervision than you're accustomed to in your exam, can you behave with integrity because your colleagues are counting on it? They're counting on you, you're counting on them. So that's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee when all those students are sitting in a classroom either. But I think that will be one of the challenges we have to actually address to ourselves, to say we're in an environment here where it's more difficult to force everyone to follow the rules. And yet, I don't think there's any mystery about what those expectations are. I think we need to challenge ourselves and challenge each other to say, understand there's fewer people looking over my shoulder. That doesn't change one bit what my expectations of how I'm going to behave under these circumstances. For those students who are worried that someone else will completely ignore what I just said, I'm not sure I can tell them anything that will make them feel better. Again, as someone who's written exams for probably 30 some years, I'm pretty confident I can write an exam that's fairly difficult for someone to cheat and gain much advantage on. I think most faculty can do that, but I think we also need to challenge our students to say, if you're unsure what's expected of you, what's allowed, what's not allowed, ask. And once you know, the game is not to see what you can get away with. The game is to see how can we all be disciplined about holding ourselves accountable for what those expectations are. And I'd like to see us talk about that fairly publicly as we head towards finals.
I'd like to add something here, and I think President Simon made a really good point, which is how we act now is going to speak a lot to how we come together as a community in the fall. And one of the reasons we didn't move toward online proctoring, which was, I think, requested by many faculty, is because it's really important for us to remember our own standards and expectations and the public good. And I think when you think about the public good in the face of COVID-19 and all the types of activities we see out in terms of, hoarding products or keeping our own socially distancing ourselves, even though we're maybe more concerned with those around us, this is really one of those times when you start thinking it takes a bit of courage to act with integrity, but that's what we need in our society. That said, I'm not immune to the fact that students are nervous about their grades. They're nervous about, how they're going to do. They're nervous about how students are grading on curves. If I were in the classroom, what I would be doing, and I'm not teaching this semester, but what I would be doing would be thinking about how do I have a good open book exam so that students can use material and don't feel like they are being disadvantaged if they're being the honest one. So I want to say I hear that. But I also want to think, I think President Simon made a really good point. This is an opportunity for us to think about how we want to behave in the world. And I hope that students really think about that as they think about their own behavior in the classroom, including during exams.
If my stuff is still on campus in my dorm, when can I move out? Can I leave my things there until fall 2020?
I would, my first inclination would be, well, you'd want it there for the whole summer, but that's my first inclination. I think that's going to be a no. And the reason why I say that is because during the summer is when we do, I shouldn't even say that. We don't know what's going to happen during the summer right now, but typically during the summer is when we do a lot of the maintenance and cleanup of the residence halls. So that's why everybody gets to move their stuff out. If they make some type of arrangement with either housing or whoever, they probably housing they should contact, we will probably pack it up and put it somewhere. But no, it cannot, I don't think it can stay in the rooms at all. It doesn't seem like it's very safe to do that. I think we would offer to find somebody to pack it up and either send it or do something, whatever the instructions were from the students. So they should contact anybody who's interested in doing something, should contact housing and see what they can work out.
Were small tangible fees such as the activity fee, lab fee, technology fee, printing credits, etc., incorporated into the refund?
No. That's the easy answer, no. Only thing is in the refund is housing and dining.
And I guess why was that decision made?
I think it gets back to what Pat was saying, that even though we have services that we're not using now, that we have changed the way that we're delivering what the educational experience that we have. So we didn't even think about those being a part of what the academic mission and services that we do are. So, and
Yeah.
Pat can say it better than I can, but. And,
Our library,
Jennifer, you might wanna
our
say
library and
something.
technology services fee expenses has gone up considerably. What I would also note is I know that students feel like, gee, there's this 6 weeks that I didn't get my this period, but for 3/4 of the semester or 3/4 of the academic year, students are on campus and using those various products and services. And you know, I wish I could make the reagents that are in people's chem labs available to them so they could have their chem lab in the classroom, and we can't do that anymore. I can assure you, I just came out of another meeting earlier this afternoon when we were talking about have we been able to gather up all the expenses that we are having. You know, so and this is expensive for the university, and I want to assure people that we are doing our best to make sure that things are fair for students. It's also not something that we're sort of making money by keeping fees.
I thought you were going to suggest that we send people the reagents from the chemistry lab, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm not sure that's such a great
No,
idea.
we won't do that. We won't do that.
One of the things that Jennifer touched on, though, certainly there's a financial impact for all of us, and we are collecting the additional costs that we are experiencing because of this in order for us to continue with the quality education that we want to give our students. So it will be interesting to see how that all comes out.
I would want to encourage students also, though, to recognize that while all the faculty and staff at Lehigh are working at home, they are all working. So the people that you might have talked to or conversed with or connected with in the library or an LTS or the department coordinator in your department, they're all available. And so if there's issues or you just want to say hello or you'd like to get some help with something, those folks are all available. They're online. They're doing their jobs. You can't drop in the office to see them, but they're around. So if students are thinking, gee, I'd like some help with a library search or I'd like to chat with the departmental coordinator, do connect with them. Send them an email, find a way to get in touch. I think hopefully that's pretty easy. Email the department chair. Those folks, they're all doing their work and more than happy to interact with students, even if it's in an online way.
Can you explain a bit more about the new investments Lehigh made into online resources that compensate for the lost on-campus resources?
Well, I can say a few. I wouldn't want anyone to sort of get too hung up on the math to say dollar for dollar, but the big thing from a campus standpoint is hardware and software that faculty need to teach their courses online. Obviously, some of the software was already available, Zoom and other things. Not every faculty member, in fact, many did not have the camera, the other kind of hardware. So there was a chunk of just making faculty capable of doing their teaching work now pretty much from their homes. So whatever they needed, they had to be able to take with them. So that was a starter. A second big effort, which actually will not sound perhaps as big as it is simply training. This is crash courses in how do I put my course online. So as you know, we sort of had maybe a few days head start during spring break when faculty were around, perhaps students were not. And between that week and the first week, LTS probably put on 30 or 40 different workshops for faculty who may have had little to a lot of experience in online teaching to be able to get themselves up to speed, figure out what they need to do, how to understand what are best practices. So there's aside from just sort of hardware, there's also a lot of just learning and practice and training. The other key linchpin from a Lehigh perspective, so obviously we depend on the internet, which is this sort of diffuse set of connections, which is a little hard to describe who owns and who pays for any of them. Of course, we all do. So we're relying on internet connections that go across the country and in fact around the world. But there's a few hubs at Lehigh, in particular the CourseSite hub, which almost every class uses. That's a Lehigh product, meaning it's one thing we're responsible for. So there's an example where under normal circumstances, it's problematic, but not a catastrophe. If course site doesn't work for a day, now it's a catastrophe. We can't not have it work. It must work. So we need to have enough backup of humans as well as hardware to be able to pretty much guarantee those systems won't fail because we depend on them to be able to deliver coursework. In a normal live class, you know, it's annoying if course site isn't available for a couple hours, but we'll work around it. So those are at least examples of kinds of things where a shift to online makes us rely on things that in the past weren't must-haves and now are. Learn to and get equipped to do new things that in the past we did sometimes, but not always, and now we're doing them always.
We've gotten a couple comments from students still asking about the cost loss from having classes transition to online, some issues like professors dropping course content, lowering standards, failing to effectively teach material online, canceling office hours, as well as those tangible fees that are lost. Has there been any consideration as to looking more into this or other ways that these things could be mitigated or costs could be given back?
I guess not seriously, because in my view, the goal here, again, is, which I said earlier, is to be able to deliver as near as we can the quality of education that students would get if they were on campus. That's been our singular focus, less about how to do this cheaply. And so now everyone can debate whether an online is equivalent to live. Of course, we are a residential institution, so we all much prefer live and would recognize there are some unique features of live participation that are difficult to replicate online. So I freely agree with that. But our focus has been less about how can we do this as inexpensively as possible, and more about how can we do this with high quality as possible. So in most respects, I'd say no. Most of those academic expenses that are part of your tuition bill are still happening. They're still part of the activity. So in that respect, they may look different, they may appear different. Certainly you can identify the fact that today you cannot go and sit in Fairmont Library like you might have done a month ago or you did last semester. True enough. And on the other hand, there are other things which you can do today online that you probably could not do 2 months ago or last fall. So in most respects, our focus has been my focus has been pretty much exclusively on trying to deliver the educational outcome that we seek for our students and do that as best we can, even though the environment is different, medium is different, where, you know, how we encounter students is different. And in fact, some of the details of what happens in a class are different. They almost naturally have to be.
I'll just add a follow-up point about student learning and what we're expecting our students to do and our faculty to do. And on the one hand, I've been remarkably impressed with both students and faculty and how hard they are working and diving in and adapting to a new model. I think that's not easy. I think I've seen the university come together in ways that has just been really terrific. I know this is harder. I hear this from faculty. For those of you who think like, oh, the faculty are on staff on campus aren't doing anything, we are working our fannies off, sitting in front of Zoom meetings and whatnot all day. And I think what we're telling faculty and what I'm telling students is the core learning, you know, we sit down for a semester course and say, what are the critical things for students to learn? And you do that every semester and you realize, honestly, standing up, I mean, I'm a faculty member, I stand up in front of a class and I'd love to say that every student remembers everything I said and gets every bit of communication out of that, but I know that's not true. I've got to think about what are the core learning outcomes for every class. And what we want in the online environment is for our faculty to also be thinking about what are the core learning outcomes and how can we get students to be doing the fundamentals of learning. I also think that while some things are lost, not being face-to-face, other things are gained. And I was having actually a discussion with President Simon about this because he and I both work, and as does Provost Farrell, as does Vice President Johnson, work with our peers across country in online environments. And it takes a while to learn how to do that effectively, and it's hard, and it doesn't always feel like it's going very well. But just because you think the situation doesn't feel easy doesn't mean you're not learning a lot. And actually, I think some of the skills that we are all having to dive into right now are things that are really, really important in today's method of communication. And so I think the learning may be different in some ways, but I am actually pretty confident that students are learning a lot this semester.
Which students should submit a refund request? If a student opts for a credit instead of a check for reimbursement, can that credit be applied to any Lehigh expenses?
Yes, it can be, and it will be used probably, unless you're a senior or you're not planning to come back, then you should request a refund. Otherwise, the credit will be there and it can be used next fall for any of those expenses.
So is the default for the reimbursement a credit or a physical check?
The default is a credit on the bill. If you like a check, you can, there's a form that would submit that we've asked people to submit that they can ask for a check.
Think of it like your credit card bill. You return something and you get a credit on your bill.
In the event of a second wave of COVID-19 cases in the U.S., will Lehigh continue to implement the same policy of online learning in the spring semester? Will other actions be taken?
Well, we'll certainly, I think within the next few weeks, we'll have to decide about first summer term and maybe both summer terms. Whether, what our best guess is, I guess is the way I'd put it, about how we think the COVID-19 will evolve. So certainly a possibility is that one or both summer sessions will be online, a very real possibility. That's about the best I can say. I meet with the deans pretty regularly. We've agreed that they would contact with their faculty, and probably next week we'll come to some decision, at least about the first summer session, perhaps about the entire summer. But yeah, it is a genuine possibility that we may choose to stay with online delivery for at least part of the summer, partly with the uncertainty that it's not clear how long the actions we all have taken will have to last. We do need both students and faculty to plan for what they wish to do for summer. So we want to be able to make that decision relatively early. So that'll come in the next week or two.
Great. We just have a couple more questions left. Is Lehigh working with other universities in making similar administration decisions across the board?
Informally, well, Pat?
No, go ahead.
No, you can go on.
Okay.
So
I was going to say informally, yes. Earlier today, I was on a Zoom call, because that's what we're doing. I meet regularly with the provost from the other Alvaic institutions, the Lehigh Valley Association of Independent Colleges. We spent the entire session talking about how we're adapting to COVID-19 situations. I think each of us is probably on the phone, on listservs, with our peers, either individually or in groups. I've talked to individuals at other universities to figure out how they're handling things. So what they do doesn't define what we do, but it's always good to see how other people are moving forward and see what good ideas we can share.
What is the protocol for professors who get the coronavirus? How will the university or other faculty members support these professors?
Well, certainly for individuals, who identify themselves with symptoms, or I suppose if other people identify themselves with symptoms, we would not want those individuals are not on campus now. So the first thing we'd want to do, of course, is make sure they get appropriate treatment with their physician and healthcare and so on, and they can work with kind of where they live and who else in their home and their family might have been affected and so on. So I got to say, our first concern is just with the health of our employees and the people who work with us. In terms of how that might impact students, of course, it could be that, again, with most faculty working from home, under some circumstances, perhaps symptoms might be mild and those individuals might be able to continue to deliver their coursework. Again, they're already at a distance, so they're already, in a sense, quarantined. So there's probably not much further action that we would need to take. But it's also quite possible that they'd be too ill to continue and would not be able to continue their courses. We would do what we normally do. Faculty do get sick, under normal circumstances on occasion, or for various reasons unable to meet with a class for a while. And our first point is with the department and the college, department chair and college dean, to help us identify someone, another faculty member who might be able to take on their courses, who has the right kind of expertise, is willing to help out. Sometimes that's for a short period of time, maybe for a week or two. It might be longer, but that's our first go-to place, is because colleagues sort of have a very good sense of what other colleagues are doing and teaching in their courses, and are often more than happy to step in and help, again, people they've worked alongside with for a long time and take on extra courses. So that's where we'd begin and work through how might we, if we need to, find another faculty member with the right kind of expertise to step in if our original faculty member is, for health reasons, unable to continue.
How are admitted students in the class of 2024 going to get the information that typically comes with the Lehigh Life Days that have been canceled?
A good question. And as you might imagine, admissions and communications office have been thinking about this now for a while. So this will be a great experiment, and actually probably a glimpse into the future of what recruiting at Lehigh looks like, which is, as you say, so without students coming to campus, many of our current students are familiar with that, the admitted student days and the various sorts. We'll have none of those. So during the time between when letters go out, which they already have gone out to students we would like to invite to come and join us in the fall, and those students make their decisions, they will be invited to join a number of online groups. So basically, we're going to rely heavily on digital media to connect with those students, to have them connect with each other, to invite them to connect with current Lehigh students, to connect with Lehigh faculty, so that even if they can't physically come to campus, they'll get a real sense of what it feels like to be here, what some of the people are like, what some of who their new colleagues, their fellow students might be if they were to come to Lehigh. So as best we can give them, admittedly at a distance, a feel of what it would be like to be a Lehigh student. Some of what I hope students get when they come to the Lehigh Life Days is get a little glimpse of what that's like to be a Lehigh student. So it clearly is not quite the same as being able to see the campus firsthand. To be fair, there's always a number of our students for whom that was never really a choice anyway, too far away or for other reasons, never really had a chance to come to a Lehigh Life Days in the first place. So in some sense, you could say this gives an opportunity to reach out to all of our admitted students, not just those who were able to come, and really invite them to think of themselves as part of the Lehigh family, even as they're thinking about what choices they have to make, whether Lehigh or other places they might have been admitted to. So we're hoping this is really a very, very different way of connecting with students early and often. And hopefully this will be every bit as successful, and maybe even more so than our traditional ways of bringing students to campus to see the campus itself.
Okay, there's 4 other questions submitted. So once we're done with all those, we'll end this. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions. And once we get through those, we'll wrap everything up. There's another concern about the virtual exam proctoring. Many professors grade on a curve, which means cheating peers can directly undermine my resulting academic performance by forcing me into a letter grade set percentile range. Can you consider requiring that all exams be open note to level the playing field without implicitly encouraging cheating?
I would be really reluctant to require that. I think that's a solution to a problem. I think putting the problem in front of faculty, though, is a very good approach, meaning the problem is that without faculty being physically in the room, there is the possibility that 1 or 2 students, even if most of your students take their exam integrity responsibility seriously, it's always possible 1 or 2 students do not. And it's certainly appropriate for me and for students to actually say to their faculty, can we build a exam or a way of assessing learning that actually isn't subject to being distorted by perhaps that 1 or 2 students? That's a fair question. It could be that the solution is as suggested. It could be there are other even better solutions. So I would much rather put the problem to faculty and say, here's a problem that I think you're going to need to address, and be as creative as you can, consult with your students, consult with others, and invite faculty to come up with a creative solution rather than mandating a specific solution, in part because I don't know for sure that that would actually be successful. So I solely agree that that is a challenge. Again, I think it is entirely fair for students to raise that as a concern they have, and I will certainly raise it with faculty as well, and challenge them to say, can you design a final exam that is not likely to be distorted by if you do have one or two students who decide not to live up to the responsibility as students. Can you design an exam that won't damage other students if that were to happen?
What government authority is Lehigh paying the most attention to for pointers about how to handle online versus not? The White House and presumably Department of Ed, as a result, is sending a very different signal from the CDC, and state governments and local governments can also differ from the federal government. Who is Lehigh most concerned with following the guidance of, and who are we willing to ignore?
Can I just ask a clarification? I think that says about handling online or not, which could get into the Department of Education and accreditation and whatnot, and that's much more clear versus, and then talking about the CDC, is this about handling health recommendations?
They mean in terms of whether to close for public health reasons.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So I would say that with regard to health, we pay great attention to CDC and also the Pennsylvania Department of Health, who is also well connected to the CDC. Not that they disagree with each other, but often give a different perspective. And in fact, to Bureau, the Bethlehem Health Bureau. So our health and wellness leadership is in regular and constant contact with CDC and Pennsylvania Department of Health. And that's where we get most of our information and guidance regarding health effects, what are advisable moves to make with regard, for example, to social distancing, what are advisable ways to treat students who, or anyone who's been tested and yet no test returned or tested positive for the COVID virus. So in those cases, those are the kind of experts that we rely on. And of course, we have our own in-house expertise as well. That's who we rely on for health information.
My brother is starting at Lehigh next year and is worried he won't have the same freshman experience of making friends early on if we're still closed in the fall. He also said if I wanted to learn online, I could enroll in University of Phoenix, the Harvard of online universities. How do you comfort students like this in times like these?
Well, I will say, and maybe invite Jennifer to jump in. Certainly, were we to be online in the fall, that would not be the normal first year, at least start out first year student experience. It would not be the one that we might all choose, but it might be one that we would manage to work as well as we can with. So again, I'll go back to, I hope that's not the situation we're in. We're also looking at what other, were we to find ourselves in that situation. Let's not just default to saying we'll do online as long as it takes. What other options might we have? So I do want to put that out there. Certainly, even online, our goal is to not be to imitate University of Phoenix or University of Southern New Hampshire or any of the places you can think of. Our goal is to be Lehigh and Lehigh online. So what we'd like to be able to be is, yes, we're online, so in that sense, similar to lots of other online, but in many ways, the way we do online and the kind of connections students have with their faculty, even online, is going to be quite different from what you might get from someplace else. So I would say, I hope we don't find ourselves in that situation. If we do, I think we'll work pretty hard to make sure that first year experience is still an extremely positive one, even though a different way to start than might have been the case in the past. But I think we also want to work pretty hard to make sure that we don't, were we to find ourselves, simply default into saying, we'll just keep doing what we've been doing. There may be other better approaches that will be more productive for us as we go forward. So Jennifer, you want to jump in, comment there?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, we are thinking really broadly. I just came out of another meeting not 15 minutes before this, well, before we started getting set up for this one, talking with senior leaders about what are the possibilities for fall, because we don't know what the health situation will be, and so we've got to prepare for a couple of different scenarios. And people like Vice President Matherly and Vice President Hall, and we're thinking about on the academic side, the people in this Zoom session, what are the different creative ways that we can offer the best education inside the classroom and the best experience outside the classroom, given the fact that we're online. And if we're online, it's probably going to be because a huge other number of universities are also aligned. In terms of comparisons to some of the for-profit institutions or other alternatives, what I would say is, back for a long time when people say, well, why should I go to school X? One of the things I always say to consider is, don't just consider what that school can offer. Consider your peer group, because you learn a lot from your faculty, but you also learn an awful lot from your fellow students. And being able to join a pretty selective university like Lehigh in the classroom and have those connections, and yes, their connections may be via remote learning, maybe in a very different environment. I think that's a different experience for students. I can tell you that I've taught at different universities with different selectivity, different commitment levels of the students to their educational experience. They're not the same, and that makes a big difference. And that's something that really sets a place like Lehigh apart. So I would really beg to differ that what we offer is really just the same or interchangeable. And while I don't think the only reason you should go to Lehigh is because we're a great name on your diploma, the reality is you're picking a place to go for 4 years. And the coronavirus is not going to last for 4 years. We want to have as good an experience, offer as good an experience for every student that we can. My hope is that students are thinking about this in terms of what they get over their college experience as a whole, rather than for what might be the couple of months of a difficult time.
The last question, what are the resources in place for students living off campus should they go home?
Say that again. What are the resources?
What are the resources in place for students living off campus should they go home?
You want me to take a stab at a
Sure.
couple things about this? It's really hard to talk about. One of the questions is, are the resources better here where I'm living in my off-campus apartment with what I have around me, some of which might be City of Bethlehem, some of which might be Lehigh. We realize Lehigh is, doesn't have the library open, doesn't have some of the things open. And how do those resources compare to my situation at home? And I can't make that evaluation because it's going to vary by every student. What I will say is that in most cases, students who are living on campus do not have their own rooms. And if they do, they still don't have their own dining areas. They don't have solo bathrooms. When you are living in an apartment, you are probably living with other people who are coming and going in a very different way than if you were living with your family of origin, with a little more space per person in terms of how you interact with the world in a public health situation. That is one of the things that makes me think that it's a little different for graduate students where that is their permanent residence, but for many students, I would be thinking, am I better resourced and am I in a better situation with my family of origin around me? That said, for many students, they can't get there. Those resources are not available either. And then we're going to do what we can to help support our students in the Lehigh family.
Since that was the last question, is there anything else you'd like students to know that the university is working on or that you think is important just in general?
I'll make maybe a quick comment. I've said this a couple times before, that online learning, particularly in this kind of intensive sort of 100% way, is I'm sure new to most of our students. It's a little bit new to many of our faculty. I'm really impressed with how adaptable students have been. I think the idea of giving faculty feedback and faculty inviting that feedback is a really great idea. but I really appreciate students' willingness to dive in and recognize that this may not have been the way you thought you'd spend the last 6 weeks of your spring semester at Lehigh. But it still presents a great opportunity for learning and engaging with faculty, and really still, even in a different way, remaining connected with your friends from Lehigh. So my point would be to really express my appreciation for everybody involved. I don't think anyone would say this was their preference for how to finish the semester. I think we'll all, as I said in one of my notes, this will be a story, stories we'll tell each other years afterwards about we were there the semester that had to change halfway through. Hopefully we'll tell that story in a very positive way to say, and here's how I adapted, here's how I learned, here's how I really took advantage of that, even though it wasn't necessarily what my plan was.
Great. Well, I guess before we end the call, I just wanted to say thank you again to our panelists and everyone who made this happen. This came together really quickly, and we got a lot of help from the Communications and Public Affairs Office. So I really want to give all of them a shout out. Peggy, Nate, David, John, and Lindsay, thank you for everything. And also thank you to all the students who submitted questions live and in advance, as well as all of the senators who reached out to their constituents to make this happen.
Well, thanks for hosting us.
Thank you for hosting
us, Julia.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do for Lehigh. And stay safe and healthy, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Exactly.
Thanks. You too.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.